Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is January 31, 2024. I want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Also want to thank Frank Zappa for writing the music he did, because that's how I sort of met our guest today, Pete Griffin. Where you heck you calling in from, Pete?
I live in Los Angeles in the wonderful valley out near Canoga Park area. It's lovely here, although it looks like it's going to rain later tonight, which is odd, but yeah.
Thanks, Pete. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being? Wow. Happiness, and whatever that means, whether it's, obviously we're here to talk about music, so I would lean in that direction, but that doesn't work for everybody. I am not a sports fan, but that does bring joy to many, many people. And the best thing, just finding your lane and finding the thing that makes you the most happy and dedicating the rest of your life to it, and that doesn't mean not working a job and all that, like we do have to make our ends meet, obviously, but
being a musician. Yeah, being a musician. Do you have something you can fall back on? Good luck.
Exactly.
Beautiful, Pete. You get it. We're here to have fun. So the next question is, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh, interesting. I watch a lot of TV, I guess. I read a lot of read news on the app a lot, almost a little too much these days, because there's very little good news. But I am sort of an information hound. We're all sort of capable of falling down the wiki wormhole, as they say, where you get some sort of new idea and then you find out everything you can about that particular idea, which very much lends itself to the Frank Zappa conversation.
The wiki wormhole. You turned me on to a new phrase. I need that wiki wormhole. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Because it's kind of all we have, it's how to better yourself as a person. It's how to figure out how to deal with the outside world. We can be so internal at times that we kind of make up our own minds about things, whether or not we're educated on that thing. So getting as many possible points of view about whatever it is that you're talking about or thinking about, or, thinking of doing, if it's, an activity, that prepares you the best for it. You might not agree with everybody, and it might not even apply to you, but in general, I try to just make sure, I teach a lot of music too. And so I always want to make sure that when I'm teaching, I'm not just pushing my agenda on them. I want to make sure that as they're learning about music, it applies to the music that they're into, not just the music I'm into or the music that you're supposed to learn,
Really good. Pete, do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it's different for everybody. These days, unfortunately, some of the self-education thing has fallen by the wayside, where people narrow where they get their information from to a single source or a single type of source, and they don't get the full picture. So it's and that's very easy to do. So that might be the more innate version. I don't think it's species wide in terms of the way we deal with those things. I think everybody kind of takes those things in a different manner, but you have to respect that too. Not everybody wants to be an expert on everything. People like kind of not knowing. Ignorance is in fact bliss in some situations.
Indeed. And I like what your attitude is we call it suspended judgment, trying to get the big picture, comprehensive awareness. And so do thoughts create emotions?
Absolutely. Yeah. These are all great questions. Because it can, we all have the ability to get stuck in our own head, which can spiral out into depression, anxiety, anger, jealousy, all that stuff. Especially when you're comparing yourself to someone else, which, we all do far too much, and social media certainly doesn't help that. And it's even been proven now that it's affecting the social development of kids because they're constantly worried that they're not as cool or not doing as much as their peer. I go through it myself as a musician. Why does this guy have this gig when I should have that gig? And no, that's not how that works. He has it, I have mine, you know, like it's very, so those thoughts can definitely make you sad, make you happy, make you, you know, all that stuff. So the spiraling out is very much a problem. At least it is for me, but I do think that's a little more universal, where one little germ of an idea spirals out into a day's worth of sitting on the couch and contemplating whether you've made wrong decisions in your life.
Yeah, I spiral out like that. That was really well put. Fill in the blank, Pete. I don't know what I think until I
try it.
That's very good.
Yeah. Like
McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. That's action-based. Can humans think without language?
Wow. I mean, I think there's always a language. You know, you think about the development of language. My wife speaks a bunch of different languages and is always teaching me a little more Spanish or French or things like that. And I'm always fascinated as to the similarities of words and then the complete differences of words. And, you know, we all had to come up, you know, every language had to come up with a word for rock. But until you spoke to someone else, you always knew that as a rock. You just didn't know that everybody else called it a rock. You know, so it's everyone kind of comes up with their own vocabulary. And the same thing with it happens a lot in music, honestly, like where I know a lot of amazing musicians that either that claim or are actually not very trained, right? They didn't go to music school or take lessons or anything. And then I'll talk to them about music and I'll say some musical term and they'll be like, I don't know what that means. And I'm like, you actually do, but you call it something else.
Exactly. Right? I'm like that.
There's a lot of that out there and all art forms too, because art is supposed to be personal. Yep. So, you know, but I always thought it was kind of amazing thinking about even just color. Like, I know that this shirt is blue and you know that this shirt is blue, but if I put my brain into your eyes, would I see this as red, but we still call it blue? And, you know, you've just always seen this color as blue. So that's, you know, I spiral out on that stuff too. Some of those more.
Yeah, that's two things. Groucho Marx says, who are you going to believe? Your eyes or mine? Or they go, your lying eyes or mine? Who are you going to believe? Right. And then I like when you're doing a show and you say, they go, what key is this in? I go, the G of key.
Yeah.
They go, what?
Yeah,
so Chomsky, Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
My obvious answer would be music. Right.
Yeah.
There is a universality to the emotions that music kind of comes with. That it's not worldwide. You know, specifically, I talk about major and minor chords a lot. Major to Western music listeners sounds happy. Minor to Western music listeners sounds sad. That's not really the case all over the world, but it at least invokes something. You know, and that can very much surpass language in a lot of ways. My music that I write and a lot of Frank's stuff that I love is all instrumental, and yet you can kind of make your own music video to it. You know, you kind of still hear a story without any words, which is always kind of amazing. And that's, you know, so I think we're very lucky to have music when language fails.
Really good. Frank nailed it. In a couple words on Hot Rats, this is a movie for your ears. It's called sense ratio shifting. So, your observations in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Wow. I think we're a little more thinking, and I think we should be more feeling in some ways. You know, we have so many pressures put on us by society and our families and, our peers, and where we think we're supposed to be at as opposed to where we are, and things like that. And that's thinking, right? That's comparing ourselves to others or to what society says you should have a job and a kid and a house by X age and be stable and all that stuff. And then you meet so many people who've done that and they're miserable. So it doesn't necessarily, their feeling doesn't match up with the thinking in certain ways. So I would try to be more of a feeling person and all of that, but that can get you in trouble as well, where, you do so much feeling that you missed your rent payment or something like that. The real world does unfortunately factor in no matter what. So we have to balance those two.
Pete, it's funny because you said, I think we're more thinking. 80% of people go, I think we're more feeling. And it's funny. You go, well, you're thinking we're more feeling. You're admitting you're more thinking. So again, we can't really separate them because thinking and feeling are so interconnected, but we invented the word so we think we can separate them. But these are related two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
I'd say yeah, because that's your own personal, like your whoever you are is communicating with yourself that way. It's an internal conversation ultimately, and that is, sometimes those, and again, not to be so negative about all this stuff, but just it's something I struggle with all the time. If your brain, that soul is telling you something, you're going to listen to that more than you're going to listen to the people going, everything's fine. What are you talking about? Why are you sad? Why are you depressed? But your brain, your soul is going, nope, sad. And that really does come from within, and it's everyone's sort of own battle to fight. Is, what do I listen to? Do I listen to the fact that outwardly my life looks pretty good, or do I think about, why is that person inside me saying, nah, this isn't working? And again, try to justify the two.
Yeah, there's a bumper sticker on a car in my street. It says, "Don't believe everything you think."
Right.
And it could say,
I like that.
That's huge, but it could say, "Don't believe everything you feel." So again, it's like this thing. So the second Turing question is, can machines think?
I don't think so. Even with AI coming out, it's all a process. It's all been programmed, and it's all a little more predictable, even when it's not. And we've even seen that with the proliferation of AI art and things like that. It's at first, everyone was worried you weren't going to be able to tell the difference. There is the uncanny valley concept of, I can tell there's something a little off about this, where it's obviously been thought up by a robot, a computer, a machine.
Yeah, I heard a Zappa essay that he wrote, he wrote it for a magazine, read by a Zappa AI generated voice.
Right.
And first of all, I was like, wow, the words are really close. And it sounded like Frank's voice. But my friend, who's very astute, he goes, the voice didn't have the Zappa eyebrows on it.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
And I was like, but I listened to it, and it was like, that's fine. It sounded fine that he could do that. They labeled it so. You touched on this right off the bat when we started. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Ooh. I don't think they have to be. It has to be one or the other. I think finding your meaning is finding your happiness. I was very lucky that I found bass guitar as the thing that I wanted to do more than anything else in the world, and then I shaped my life so that was all I did. Not all, but as much as I could, and that led to happiness. And that's sort of, if I want to be cosmic about it, the sort of my meaning for being in this universe is to play bass and make people happy and dance and forget about whatever they're going through.
Yeah, it's funny because I got the question from Victor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says, happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning does. But again, it's like you're saying you can't separate them. That's what we think. We can separate these kind of things that are so interconnected because we invented the words. But that doesn't mean in also just the verb. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I'd say the first, for sure. I love sleep just because sometimes it's a very precious and rare commodity. So that those moments of kind of, you know, when you wake up and realize you can go back to sleep, that little step into consciousness and then brief step back out. I don't think we have any control over that. I don't think I'm going, I need to wake up right now. And then I wake up. It's more, you know, there's sort of an in-between thing, and it's almost like two different existences. You know, we're certainly not conscious, but our brain is still going through stuff. And one of the things that I get asked all the time with all the relatively weird and, you know, somewhat difficult music that I have to learn is, how do you learn it? How do you remember all that stuff? And I've only recently figured out that sleep has a hell of a lot to do with it, because in my sleep, my brain is kind of, while you know, the machine is at rest, the whatever's going on in my brain is kind of connecting things together, so that when I wake up the next day, having practiced a Mike Keneally song all night long, or a Steve Vai song all night long, or a Death Clock song, or one of my own things, or a Zappa song, I went to bed 70%, 60% knowing it. I wake up and suddenly it's much closer to 90, and my brain has figured out, okay, this is the structure of the song, but also, why don't you put your fingers here instead of there? And why don't you play it like this instead of like that? And that's not conscious. That's something happens while my brain is at rest, you know, on sleep mode with the computer. And it sort of starts to connect things a little bit more in those moments. And I'm not in control of that.
It's really beautiful, Pete. I think it's like Gary Player said, the more you practice, the luckier you get, because that's what Don Preston, who played keys for Frank for many years, he said, don't think when you play music. It's like, yeah, good luck. You still, you have this catalog and knowledge in your head, and you're sleeping and resting your brain, and it's processing where you want to go to manifest the future. It's amazing what you just said. So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I'd say light. And one of the things, I took a bunch of general education courses when I was in music school. And one of them was philosophy. And I tell this to my students all the time. There was a picture of Carlos Santana in the book. And it mentioned, or I forget if it was philosophy or psychology, but it mentioned that improvising is actually, they've done the studies. They put the little, you know, sensors in the brain. Improvising is actually faster than thought. We're not going, okay, middle finger, put your finger, go to this fret, that's a G. The G works out with the chord because it's the root of the, you know, that's not happening. It's way, way faster than that. So I think, so I'd say light would be, you know, faster than thought, certainly. And I'd say this improvisation monster that we all kind of have inside of us. And even the same, like right here, when we're talking, these words are coming out of my mouth. I'm not saying, okay, now say that. Right? It sort of happens a little bit faster, and
it is, yeah.
And I'm not really thinking about it, but I am. No. And you know, so
it is pretty amazing how we can both just talk and be present, and we think, you know, we're making sense. So, you know, we're on live TV across the whole world. Right. People could be watching, even you know, space dudes could be watching us going, these guys are making a lot of sense. It's like, right. Yeah. So a poet, Audre Lorde, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded to her and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Wow. For just kind of like taking a look at your own life, you mean? Or...
Again, you Pete, you put the questions into the context you want. So that's a good question, because it could be, you don't have to apply the word new. It's basically, what tool do you gravitate towards? But I open up some of the questions with cute quotes. You can apply it to it, to dismantling the master's house or not. And I always say, people are like, well, what does that mean? And she's a poet. And I actually use the Frank Zappa, line to explain it. He didn't say the brain police are the evil capitalist consumers or the brain police are inside your own head. He just asked the question, who
Who
are the
are
brain police?
right?
Yeah,
Let
yeah,
you
like you
answer.
decide. I'm not going to
Yeah,
tell you.
yeah.
So it's sort of like, what tool do you gravitate towards? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the way I can approach that is again learning music, learning other people's
yeah,
music, and
yeah,
especially a denser catalog like the Frank Zappa one. Or I played with Mike Keneally, the Frank Zappa alumni, about 2 weeks ago, and his stuff is easily dense and difficult. But as you kind of go through it, you start to see some of their tools. You
yeah,
do sort of uncover, oh, you did, and it's not even like it's not a cliche, and it's not saying that they did the same thing twice, but you sort of see how they came to that same idea, and it makes it so that especially when you're so focused on a single composer's music, you start to see some of their, I like this word tools. I was going to say tricks, but tools is
yeah,
way better.
yeah,
And then you can either extrapolate that into your own life and go, oh, so that's how you would write for the guitar part. I would never think of writing for the guitar part like that, but that makes sense. Or, okay, that's an interesting way of approaching a bass line. I would have never thought of that, but now I've seen you do it in two different situations and I like it. So maybe the next time I'm writing a bass line, some of that will trickle in.
it's a really good point, Peter. You're highly advanced because it taught me well. See, you didn't say your tool was music. You said learning music. So, like, yeah, it's like me. I'm a student, and I just
Mm-hmm.
keep trying to learn. And I think
Right,
Frank was like that too. Frank was just trying to learn what Varese and Edgar Varese and Spike Jones did.
right.
And it's like the great. And then you go, well, then I might trickle in. What a great verb, because
Mm-hmm.
that Harold Bloom says you absorb your influence, then you abandon them, and
Right.
it's good luck, you know.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
just not become a clone?
Right.
And it's like
Yeah.
you hear these guys, like the great line with Frank was the ex Zappa musician would put an ad in the paper, ex Zappa musicians, new
Mm-hmm.
album. And Frank would go, well, if they're ex, that means they're no good. They're no
Yeah.
longer with me.
Yeah. Something
So he
happened there.
sort of twisted it, but
Yeah.
it is like, oh, what ex Zappa musician didn't try to sound like a Zappa clone, like, oh,
To a
I got
certain
it.
extent.
Yeah. But I mean, there's people who don't. So what new toy do you suggest?
Mm. Um, Basically anything that lets you be creative.
Yeah.
Ever since the pandemic for me was, as devastating as it was for anybody in terms of not working and worrying about, again, your purpose and your meaning. And suddenly that's all gone. And what am I going to do? And having any sort of control. And that's why I wrote and released some new music during that time, because it was a way to have control over
Yeah.
something. So and during that time, I did wind up getting a bunch more students who never had any plans of being professional musicians. They just kind of want to dabble with it. And I think
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. I think the universe needs more creativity, and we need to just make weird things and put it out there. And if it's just for us, or the one I always say is rather than using the stock iMovie music to soundtrack your child's first steps or your trip to Lake Tahoe or whatever, write that yourself.
Yeah.
Get into GarageBand on the computer or something on your phone.
Yeah.
Mess around with a piano, like literally anything. Just by smacking away at all the options, you'll find something that you're drawn to. You're being creative, whether you know all the details about what you're actually doing does not matter. And just kind of use that as a way to tap into, making something that wasn't previously there.
Yeah. Joseph Boyce said it great. Says everybody's an artist, but
Yeah,
like,
I
oh well,
agree.
yeah. And the dabble word was great.
Mm-hmm.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Money. Yeah, stability, that kind of stuff. Just because it's that's society and that's where we're at, and being able to. I'm very very happy in my life these days, but I want that to continue.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of how do I support that? How do I take this whole pursuit of happiness that I've dedicated my entire life to, and make sure that I'm still paying the mortgage and feeding the dog and and all that stuff. So that those will occasionally keep me up at night, because I did pick a very unpredictable career and
Yeah.
you know, general business. But I know how to ride it out, and I know it is in fact a roller coaster, and there's peaks and valleys, and when it's in the valley, there is another peak coming, and I at least try to tell myself that in those moments. But yeah,
That's great, Pete. You'll appreciate another Zappa thing. I appreciate you being so honest. Frank said, in order to be in the music business, you have to sell your cock and your balls. I told that to a rock star, big rock star once, who's like 25, really young.
uh-huh.
And he goes, gee, I thought I only had to sell my soul.
Yeah. No, it is a little more. There is like there is a pound of flesh aspect to it for sure.
Pound of flesh. You have ESP. The next question is, McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Pete, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Wow. Because a lot of times it doesn't fit with, you know, our outward life. You know, I love going to museums and looking at both modern art and ancient art, and realizing that since the dawn of humanity, there has been that drive. There have been people who have had a vision in their head, and they've wanted to make it into a physical thing that that survives ultimately, that transcends their own existence, right? That lasts beyond it. And that's I see what you're saying about, you know, artists are putting that out. Not everybody can tap into that. Some people are afraid of the weirdness. You know, Frank was a big proponent of embracing the weirdness and letting your and freaking out, you know, and all of that stuff. And people, we're also controlled and contained by, again, society and how we're supposed to act in this situation and all of that. And, you know, obviously keeping things legal, but I think that is, you know, that can definitely be a constraint more than a guide. So if we were all able to tap into that and be okay with whatever weirdness it pushes back up to the surface, there'd be a lot more art in the world. But not everybody's like that. So you have to be okay with that too.
Really good, Pete. I appreciate you really get what I'm after. And the next question goes along with that. Do artists have moral obligation?
After a certain point, I'd say, if you're at the point where you realize you do have a reach and a voice and an audience, the moral obligation, yeah, I don't think you want to present something that is damaging to society, or, you know, or to that person, to your listeners' life. You know, you don't want to start planting ideas in some impressionable kid's head that those things are okay. But at the same time, you know, obviously we have to be free to do whatever we want and not really be judged for it, and know that certain things are satire. We don't mean what we're saying. You know, Frank Zappa's lyrics have all sorts of stuff in there where I'm up there playing it and singing every word and then going, well, if someone just kind of heard just that lyric.
Yeah. You know, the key line is, it's in that other German Zappa doc where they left the line, and I'll have the cheerleader help me with my paper. Then I'll go take her home and rape her. It's like, back then, we knew what context he was saying that in.
Right.
He wasn't. Yes. And now you sing it, and it's like Dweezil singing the word quaalude. People don't know what a quaalude is anymore. Right. Yeah. This is funny because I have to interject this to go contemporary. Is Taylor Swift and Beyonce obligated to say vote for your body, women? Because the age group that doesn't vote the most in America is women between 25 and 35. Yeah. They both have a lot of power. It's already been proven because the Republicans are freaking over Taylor, and she's saying
she's a
Do you
psyop
think,
and all
but
that.
this is like, but is this the flip? Do you think personally they're obligated to go, like Frank said, register to vote and vote?
Yeah, I think that, yes. I think letting everyone know that regardless of what, let's say I'm Taylor Swift, regardless of what I think, you have, everybody in our country has the ability to have that power to vote for whatever it is that we feel. And I think pushing people to do that at the very least, without directing them one way or the other, I think there is an obligation for that for sure, especially
Yeah.
on that level. I mean, that for how many people both of those artists you mentioned are reaching, that can really change things, right?
Hello.
Yeah, that really, like, they are, if that amount of people showed up to vote one way or the other, suddenly the results of the election will be different because we have a new group of people who were underrepresented previously and are now, represented. So I do think that at least pushing people to speak for themselves and stand up for themselves and whatever that is, and fight whatever they see as evil, that we have the power to do that. We do have these, within certain, limitations. We're not going to all be vigilantes, but
Pete, you're really smart. You're great talk. You're really thinking, well, I got to throw in one more what if.
yeah,
You're Sam and Dave.
okay,
You're Sam. You had a long career, but you might still need the money.
right.
Trump hires you to play his inauguration. This happened, and they
Right.
said yes. Would you?
I would not. No.
Even if you're Sam and Dave and you're starving.
Well, yeah, I actually had. This is, I wouldn't normally talk about this, but I play in like an event band and like a cover band for swanky parties and rich weddings.
Oh, I think
like
I saw you guys playing on YouTube once with Sheila.
No, yeah, we've done that too, but this
Yeah,
is
okay.
a different entity entirely.
Okay.
But there was some rumblings that didn't wind up happening, that we were offered to play a fundraiser for the previous president.
Yeah.
And almost everyone in our band said no. And
Yeah.
I was sort of on the fence about it because, their money's just as green as everybody else ultimately. Right. But there is the connotations and,
yeah.
I try to stay completely apolitical in my public persona because it only gets you in trouble. I've made that mistake, even with just simple little musician things that I've posted about online, where I'm like, for example, I never really liked bass tapping, like how it's just not really my thing. So one time, maybe 10 years ago, I put something on Facebook, man, I don't really like bass tapping. Flash forward a few years, I get a gig playing with Paul Gilbert, and I have to play a bunch of Billy Sheehan parts, and that is all bass tapping, and I have to learn how to do it, and now I kind of like it. So you do have to watch.
Oh, there you go.
You do have to watch what you say as a public person. Obviously, it's a little lower stakes in that sense. But the flip side, going back to what you said before, what was amazing about that whole sort of situation is, under any other circumstances, it's an honor to play for a president. Right. I mean, that's another thing that you put on your resume as ex Frank Zappa band member, played for a president. Don't say who, but to say played for a presidential inauguration. Like, that's at any other time in history, that is kind of a huge honor.
And Pete, you might, I'm not saying I'm happy you said what you did, but I'm saying you might go play it, get paid, and have a great revelation about humans in general. Right. And not that you're going to turn over your political thinking, but you're going to invade the enemy.
I actually have a perfect story for that. We did play a Republican's wedding. It was I don't remember who it was, but the crowd was very much leaning in that direction. And our band, being not speaking for myself, but some of the other guys being musicians and living in Los Angeles, maybe didn't agree with them so much. But we were all looking at each other as we had packed the dance floor, and they were all getting down and making asses of themselves and dancing their ass, really having a good time. And we're all kind of looking at each other like, there are human beings here. There is a human being underneath that. They still love a backbeat. They still love, Uptown Funk. and all that. And we were all kind of driving back to the hotel afterwards going, what just happened? Like, did we just reach across the aisle with with celebration, or
that's
stuff like
actually
that?
it's very touching, because that's
Yeah,
what you want to do, is share the universal language of music. That's a commonality to all humans.
it really is. And I'm very, and another reason I'm so happy with what I do
Yeah,
is that it is universal. I don't want to know what the person in the crowd thinks about those
yeah,
things. I don't want them to know what I think.
yeah.
Let's exist in this little bubble of this fun little groove that we're sitting on, and how I'm responding to it, how you're responding to it, which affects how I'm responding to it again. That transcends all of that stuff. It's a very human experience that has nothing to do with any of that stuff, those
Beautiful,
beliefs and stuff. Yeah.
beautiful. Pete, are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Ooh. Um. I think old ones for sure. I don't like stagnating. I don't like seeing things being just kind of regurgitated again and again. There's in some ways there's something to be said for some of these new bands that sound exactly like Led Zeppelin or something like that. At least, hopefully, you think that somebody, a younger person who has never heard Led Zeppelin, listens to them and then goes listens to Led Zeppelin.
Yeah,
But as the rehashing of old ideas that might not even be relevant anymore is sort of the problem. So
yeah,
I love new ideas. I'm very much, my mom is a science teacher, and so I'm very much science oriented and experimenting oriented and hypothesizing and things like that. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. You find out quickly. Or if that idea doesn't work, okay, that didn't work. Let's move on. Let's try something else. But just applying the old ideas again and again and again and again, and expecting the same results, it's that the world has moved on and will always be moving on, so that the new becomes old and blah blah blah. So we need people to be constantly thinking of new, seemingly crazy concepts that eventually become the norm, and then we got to get away from those.
exactly.
It's a constant progression.
What a progression. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Wow. One that comes up a lot, and this gets back to, of course, music and emotion. I remember I must have been about 5 or 6 or so, because it was the first house we lived in, and the beginning chords to "Don't Dream It's Over" by, I want to say, Crowded House, if not Simply Red, one of those '80s bands. It's this kind of mournful, just like simple guitar part, no words, nothing like that. And I remember hearing that and like feeling something, feeling a little sad by it, and kind of realizing, oh my God, look at the power that a simple guitar chord has to suddenly take me from, my 5-year-old bliss to thinking, wow, maybe there is sadness, and it can be directed by something as simple as a guitar chord. It was pretty amazing, and I still think about it all the time.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
For me, it's a blessing, for
Yeah,
sure. I need my memory, like I was saying before, of how do you remember all this stuff with all the music, and it's not so easy, and I have learned that I can't trust it as much as I used to, unfortunately. So I've gotten a little better about it, where eventually the hard drive becomes full, as I say. But you have to. Yeah, but the other thing is, there's a certain time travel aspect to memories, where you can even put yourself in both almost in the emotional and mindset that you were in when something happened to you years and years ago, and you can kind of go back to that moment and almost relive it in a way where obviously you can't change it, but you can maybe look at it a different way, or see how it applies to what's happening to you today in a much more cogent way. It's actually way more direct, and if you didn't have those memories, you couldn't apply it to now, right? So I think it's, as much as people also have the stuff that they wish they could just delete, all those embarrassing moments, or I can't believe I said that, I certainly have tons of those. But you learn to either laugh at them and get over it, or ultimately or learn from them,
yeah.
and get better.
Really good. Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Interesting. Well, my older brother, I have a brother who's about 10 years older than me. So we were never peers necessarily. I mean, we get along great and I love him. But he was, so much older that we never fought. If we fought, he'd win. It was like pretty obvious. So he directed me towards a lot of really, really cool music that I wouldn't have been otherwise. Frank Zappa wasn't one of them, but Genesis was, and Peter Gabriel, and the Police, and the Beatles, and a lot of stuff like that. And I, from an early age, I thought he was the coolest thing ever. And he was making me tapes, and I would devour them and wear them out and be able to sing him back all the stuff. And that really set me on a path of music, especially the on the proggier side of things, like the
Yeah.
Genesis. Music is not just a 5 minute verse, chorus, verse song about a girl you like. It can tell this longer story. It can go through all these movements. So there's that. And then not in my immediate family, there are, plenty of bass players out there that I've idolized and then copied as being an influence and then tried to move away from copying them. The relentlessness of the output of certain people, like a Frank Zappa, like a Mike Keneally, like Devin Townsend, like Michel Ndegeocello, who's also one of my favorite bass players. Just their ability to not really have that limiter on their creative output. They kind of just go, oh, I've had this idea, polish it up, get it as close to what I originally saw that it was, put it out. Right.
Yes.
We all, I certainly have the ability. Some of these songs that I just released some of the ideas are 20 years old and I'm finally putting it out and it feels so good to finally have it out. And now that I have this machinery that I can keep putting it out, I've got a bunch more that are 75% done that have been 75% done for years. And just put it out, just get it out there. And that is something I admire immensely in any artist, music or art or movies or whatever. Like the ability to just kind of go, that's what it is. I saw there's that documentary about South Park, came out maybe about 10 years ago. And towards the end of it, one of the guys, they show them making an entire episode, which they write in a week. They write and record and animate the whole thing in a week. That's how they manage to stay so current and, relevant. But towards the end of it, he's about to hand in the tape and he goes, I really don't want to hand in this tape. I think it's the worst episode we've ever made. I really just don't want to do it, but we could work for it for 2 more weeks. We could work on it and it might get 5% better. So we just have to do this and move on to the next one. And I still think about that and get chills and feel like my mind is expanding because
That's
it's like,
really
move on to the next thing. It's,
Yeah, so much of what you tell me applies to me. What year were you born?
79.
79. Yeah. So 80. So yeah, I was born in 53 and I'm doing the exact same thing. Songs I wrote 20 years ago, I'm finally getting them out.
Yeah.
And the no limiter thing is so applicable. Right. Just like Warhol said, don't worry about what people think about your art. Just keep making it. Yeah. And that no limiter thing. Then you have to have that sense where, okay, I don't have any pressure. I could spend another 8 weeks on this. No, just put that one out and go to the next one. And then if, somewhere down the line, you want to work on it again, fine. But it's having that discerning ability to go, okay, next,
Stamp done on it and get it out the door. Yeah.
So did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, I was raised Catholic.
Roman Catholic, me too. Yep. So do you pray?
No.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Wow. Good job. Thanks for being nice to people, which I think I am. And thanks, I think that's, a little pat on the head, if that, like a dog kind of thing. I want to be told that I did good. You know, I don't necessarily believe in that version of all of that,
Yeah.
and this is a sticky kind of topic to get into, but I do think that, you know, there is a larger kind of you know, entity that is all of us together, and if we're helping each other out, then we're making that entity happy. You know, if we're helping each, and another thing that, both being a musician, where we're all in this not so great industry, we all got to help each other out. I used to think all other bass players were the enemy.
Yeah.
And then I realized, oh wait, I'm getting all my work from other bass players. They can't do the gig. They know I'm not going to steal the gig, but I'll still do a good job.
Yeah.
So they pass along, and vice versa, and all that stuff. So I think that there's just recognizing our kind of presence in the global community is what, you know, the reward. You know, that's sort of the goal.
Did you get that from the way your parents raised you, or on your own?
From the way my parents, for sure.
Yeah.
And then I extrapolated it into my own version. But you know, and it's part of the positives of most organized religions is it really comes back to that. Be nice to people.
Yeah.
Put good things out into the universe. Good things will come back to you. Trust in the process. Trust in, you know, the ups and downs and all of that. And it's you know, and I don't take it. I don't take away anything from people who are much more religious than I am. I think it's beautiful. I think I almost wish I had something like that, but my version of it is a little more specific to me, that it's very hard to verbalize. But it, you know, I definitely think that, you know, my parents raised me to be nice, you know, and be nice to people, and be kind and help each other out and all of that. And that's
the best way, definitely.
Universal. Yeah.
But it follows this is almost the flip opposite. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think I'd love to think that it uses people, that people can be sort of, you know, fixed in that way, you know, that they aren't born that way. But I also watch enough true crime things where you find out about, you know, serial killers and stuff like that, where some switch is hit, or they're just raised, or, you know, and again, also, it's a matter of population. The more times we roll the die on what type of person is this going to be, the more times the die rolls off the table and becomes something, a complete aberration from the normal, and we get sometimes good things and sometimes really awful / evil things. So maybe I just contradicted myself on that.
Well, no, that's all right. You again, Pete, I find what you are is able, what Pascal, the philosopher mathematician, said, is in order to understand anything, you have to understand this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between. It's hard to not let a bias take you over. But the real hidden question in it is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Mm-hmm.
JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I definitely agree with that, you know, especially these days where a lot of these, you know, battles between you and an enemy, or, you know, anything like that, are very public. Right. That, which is terrible, ultimately, because then it all gets more extreme that way. We need to sort of bang the pots and pans together louder on our own side because they're doing it. But yeah, it's you know, I don't necessarily think about enemies because I don't think I have one, but occasionally I can. The big one being comments on things or reviews or things like that. I can tell you word for word about a dozen poor reviews of my performance, especially in the early days with Dweezil or some of these other bands that I've been in. But I can't tell you any of the positive ones that I've gotten, which greatly outweigh the negatives. You know, so it's that by sort of focusing on that, I'm sort of giving that power. You know, in the same way of someone is constantly bagging on you online. If you head into that, you are feeding them. You're giving them the power of letting them know that you are bothered by what they're saying. You are affected by what they're saying. And a lot of times, yeah, you ignore it and it goes away. Sometimes that's not the case though.
Yeah.
So, but that's, I mean,
Interesting.
taking the high road is always, that's usually the best choice. Sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes there does have to be a somewhat equal response to an attack of some sort. But luckily, I don't really have to deal with that too much because I like everybody.
Beautiful, Pete. So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?"
Mhm.
Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Like, why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Because life is boring sometimes, and not nearly as exciting as the fictionalized version. Or life is messy, right? It's
Yeah.
never like it's a lot harder to follow the plot of the real story than it is the whittled down for Hollywood kind of version. That one I find a lot, really. Again, the wormhole, like you start falling down at this, you find all these details where the true version seems way less likely that all those things happen. Like, no way, as opposed to the one that's put on screen.
Well, Pete, walk us through your tipping point to become a musician. Like, did you sort of told us how your brother turned you on to this cool prog rock music?
Mm-hmm.
You had that great epiphany when you were 5 or 6. You heard a chord, you realized the power of music. Where did you go? Oh, that's what I want to do. Did you start studying in high school and say, "This is my career, this is my calling, I'm going to do this"? Where was that tipping point?
Yeah, I had played trumpet in elementary school band, and I was okay at it, and but it was still homework. It still was like, okay, got to practice the trumpet. My mom had to be like, okay, here's the book, let's go through it, all that stuff. And then they got me a bass, and I fell in love with it pretty hard, pretty quickly. But when I was a freshman in high school, there was a senior in high school named Dan Bingley, who was a bass god, like just amazing. It was doing the slapping thing before I'd ever seen that, and was also super popular and getting all the girls and all that stuff. And I'm like, this guy is so cool. And so I started taking lessons with him and kind of became friends with him and the rest of the guys in his band. But I was also following him around like an annoying freshman. And then unfortunately, a couple of years right out of high school for him, so I was still in high school, he died of bacterial meningitis, like super suddenly. And I was so devastated by that, just thinking I was never going to hear him play bass again. Like I didn't know how I could continue what I wanted to do without reflecting off what he was doing. But instead of it depressing me to never play it again, I was like, well, since he doesn't have the chance to do this, I have to. I have no choice now. It really kind of triggered this whole thing of this opportunity was stolen from him. I need to follow in that same path. I don't think I'm anywhere near as good as what he was, but that's a matter of opinion. But it really triggered that in the tragedy leading to something positive. But I would give it all up to hear him play again, hear what he would be doing today. And I would probably still be a bass player, but it was
Right.
it was enough of an impetus to, well, I got to do it. It literally, like, I've never thought anything else.
But then
From that
did
moment.
you go to college? Well, let's go back to the trumpet for a second. Did you pick trumpet because you said, "Mom and Dad, I want to play an instrument," or they said, "Oh, you got to play an instrument," and they picked trumpet? How did the trumpet
I
get picked?
think, good question. I think you were able to try a couple different ones one day in elementary school, and for some reason, I liked trumpet. It was easier to transport rather than a big old
Right,
trombone or cello or
right.
anything like that. And then what was funny was I one of my neighbors had gotten a guitar, and we had started talking. Oh man, let's start a band. I'm like 12. So I asked for an instrument for Christmas. I did not ask for a bass. I asked for I don't know, guitar, keyboard, something called a bass. I don't really know what that is. My parents somehow decided on bass, and
Wow.
that Christmas I opened up, and you know, the shaft of light comes into the box, and the angels are singing, and you know, and there were definitely moments where they regretted getting me that thing because it took me on a different path than maybe what they had thought for me. But now they're super happy for me and incredibly
Good.
supportive.
But then after your friend dies, did you go to a bass institute or college or what?
I went to Northwestern University, and I went to the music school there.
Oh, you studied composition and playing at Northwestern.
Yeah, I had a very general music degree. I wasn't like a bass major or anything like that.
Yeah.
I just got a bachelor of arts in music. And like I said before, it actually allowed me to and forced me to take other classes, you know, which I liked ultimately. There were some where I was like, what am I doing here? But like some of the philosophy and psychology and logic and some of those things where I'm definitely a little more, you know, prepared to deal with the real world rather than had I just gone to a very, very strictly music-based kind of thing. I also met a lot of people who are still my best friends on the planet there, who are also all geniuses, right? Like it's Northwestern's a pretty good school. I kind of snuck in through the music school, but everybody else that was there was valedictorian. They're all, you know, working as big time lawyers, owning buildings. Like literally every single one of my friends from college are doing something big and amazing because they're incredibly smart and intuitive people.
Dude, you're on a Grammy. You got a Grammy. That's pretty fucking big.
Yeah,
you're playing with great music. You're doing great. But let's go before we delve into music. Finally, let's talk about this. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker.
Okay.
When you're writing a Pete song, it's not an assignment. It's just Pete songwriting. What role does intention play in your creative process?
I don't think there's any intention. I more chase ideas. I'll be sitting here messing around with something. A lot of times when I'm teaching, I'll sort of absentmindedly be kind of playing something in the background while I'm watching them work their way through something. And then I'll realize, oh, that's kind of a cool shape. And luckily, we all have home studios now. That used to not be the case. And I can quickly capture whatever that idea is and then start building on it. And then the intention starts to kind of appear. But I don't sit down to go, I'm going to write a song that's like this, or that sounds like this artist. You know, it's sort of just falls out of me. Luckily for my own stuff, for my own creativity, I'm not, it's not like I'm writing for a TV show that has a deadline, or I have a label breathing down my neck that I need to put out the second album. You know, so I don't have to force it. Although there are times when, like, you know, I wish I could just push the button and be like, okay, be creative now. But I sort of have to wait for the wave to hit me.
And Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your listener when you're writing a Pete song?
Not too much. I've kind of, what's been really great about just putting my stuff out recently, it's been 10 years since I released anything under my own name, more, I think. Recently I've come up at some of these APA shows, like the one you came to, the One Shot Deal show. I have people coming up to me and saying, hey, when are you going to do your thing again? And I realized, oh, you know, because I was so worried these days, it's so easy to put something out, right? We all can put something on Bandcamp. We have the release capabilities.
Yeah.
But getting anybody to care is an entirely different operation that basically just costs money and or knowing the right people. And so I was so worried and for years, and still kind of am, but that what if nobody hears it? Right. Yeah. I put all this time into it and it just gets lost in the ether and the mess of everything else that's out there that does have a larger reach already, or does have the ability to pay a promoter or a publicist or something like that to have the larger reach. But it was in talking to those few people that I realized, why am I so worried about the millions of people that aren't going to hear it when I should be focusing on the dozens to hundreds of people who really, really want to hear it?
who
right?
want to.
And it really like affects me like deeply. Like
Yeah.
I tear up almost thinking about it. Where I'm like, who am I that these people, you know, even a handful want to
Yeah.
hear this stuff? And so all these reactions to something that came purely from me and the people that I got to play on it, which their contributions are as important as what I wrote. And the end result being something that, you know, yeah, it's I know my instrumental jazz fusion is not gonna be Taylor Swift. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be in that position. But for the few people that it brings joy to, that's really an amazing thing and not something to sneeze at.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing because I kind of get in Frank's case because he over romanticized that, and it's fine because he's not here to talk about it, and we could suss it out.
Right.
But he'd say, I only write music for myself. If other people like it, that's great. It's like, dude, you were raised in a consumer capitalism society. You
Right.
were raised with music. You were peddling your 45s in Hollywood. You're you know, you knew if you hit these notes and these words, it would sell and you would be able to make more music. So
Right.
he kind of over romanticized, like, I'm just writing this music for myself, you know.
Right.
But
Well, he
go
also
ahead.
had his whole dichotomy of, especially towards the end of his life, where he was writing rock music and booking rock tours to fund his weird classical
Right.
composition
Yeah.
and all of that trade-off. One of the things that I found, though, on the flip side of that is I want, you know, in terms of things I'm proud of in my own life, both the things I've done, but also the people that I know, where I'm really
Yeah.
good friends with some of the guys in Tool. And there's a band called Dillinger Escape Plan that doesn't exist anymore, but they're or Mastodon or some of these bands where they're essentially writing unmarketable music, right? You know, Tool writes these 9-minute epics that are in all these on time signatures. Dillinger Escape Plan is just noise to someone who doesn't know any better, but they stuck to their guns and they found their audience.
Right.
You know, and that is so inspiring to me, where I've taken a much safer route in the music industry of, I know every band needs a bass player. So I will hop from one to the next. I'll do my stuff on the side. I'll put my fingerprints on things when I get the chance to, but I'm not, I'm fully in the someone's got to buy this sort of realm, you know, but I do know people that subscribe more to that Frank idea of, no, if we just stick to our weirdness, eventually it's going to land, and then that's what changes things. Ultimately, there's a million bands that sound like Tool now. There's a million bands that sound like Dillinger Escape Plan. A million bands sound like Mastodon, and because they blaze the path by going, well, check out this weird thing that we made, and people go, wow, okay, and then it you know, expounds upon itself.
With Frank, we could go on forever and ever. When Gail heard Mr. Bungle, she was ready to sue him for ripping Frank off.
Right.
It was like in John Zorn, and it's endless. But don't get me started. But I got to tell you, you know, Andy Hallahan's taught Zappa, Beach Boys, and Hendrix for over 35 years at the University of Indiana. Okay. He's a professor of music. I mean, just to think someone's taught Zappa in a college for over 40 years is pretty amazing. And he said there's a Zappa line. I don't know. I got to get the source. He says, Frank said, I think all my songs are hits.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's like, I'm just good. But he didn't say he kind of didn't want to say, I'm trying to write a hit.
Right.
His 2 hits were flukes. He didn't peddle them to be hits, but he did pay. When I worked for him, he paid a guy to sell his music to radio stations, to get his music. I says, that's like a joke. How could you ever pay a guy? You know, he tried to sell Eric Clapton to, radio stations, get airplay. And it's like a joke because the song, the album was Tinseltown Rebellion, and it says on the album, record executive pricks. And I went up to the guy and I says, how can you sell this music to a radio station when it's saying they're record executive pricks? He goes, well, there's pricks in every business, shoe stores and everything. I was like, but you don't get what I'm saying. But anyways, so what's the function of music?
To explain the unexplainable.
Oh, wow. That's
You
good.
know, it really write lyrics. I've never really bothered trying. Every time I do, it's nowhere near as good as Paul Simon or or Frank Zappa or you know. So I've just kind of never bothered. But I also really like, even in my own appreciation, I really gravitate towards instrumental stuff a little bit more. I do love really, really good lyrics, especially when it's like a single line that can mean a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
You know, and can kind of, even a song you've heard a million times. A few years ago, I was going through a pretty rough time, and I heard "Sowing the Seeds of Love" by Tears for Fears, and there's a line towards the end of it where he goes, "Time to eat all your words, swallow your pride, open your eyes." And I'd known that song. I don't remember the first time I heard that song. That song has sort of just, you know, always been in existence in my knowledge. But to suddenly focus in on those words, I needed to hear that right then. I needed to go, wow, I need to eat my words about some decisions I've made and about some people that I was wrong about. I need to swallow my pride and recognize that I was wrong, and I need to open my eyes and move the hell on. Right. And so little moments like that, where a 3-line, you know, stanza in a song that we've all heard a million times suddenly was like a laser right into my brain and changed my life in that moment. Like really set me on a much happier path that's brought me to where I am now, where all that stuff seems like a very distant memory. I remember, no, like all the, you know, the pain I was going through in the time, and whatever it was, but it's gone. It's completely vanished because of that little switch that was hit thanks to that one lyric. And it was unexplainable. And everybody else had been saying the same thing to me, you know, but to hear it in that moment and said that way was really groundbreaking, right? It set me on a completely different path from where I was.
What's the title of the song once again?
"Sowing the Seeds of Love" by
Oh,
Tears for
that is,
Fears. It's one of their big hits.
you know, that's the beauty, sowing seeds of love. What I love about the internet is I can just go there and Google and just find, yeah, the lyrics are right there. We didn't
Yep.
always have that. You know,
Right.
every album didn't have lyric sheets, and it's such an amazing thing. And
Right.
I do have another one. It was and when Peter Case from the Plimsolls put in his newsletter, he said, here's a James Brown quote: "I've got a move that tells me what to do." I never heard that as a singular
Right.
statement. It just went by as a great line. But
Yeah.
"I've got a move that tells me what to do." That is
Love
an
it.
amazing, that's like
Yeah.
as good as Cole Porter or Irving Berlin. That's
Right.
an amazing thing. And we don't think of James Brown as a great lyricist.
Not
You
necessarily,
know,
but yeah,
yeah,
that's
and
almost like a mantra or
that
something
is
like
that's
that. You know.
amazing.
Yeah.
So McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness or human sensorium. Knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid. Even non-tangibles, say religion or philosophy, might be an extension of consciousness. What does the bass guitar extend for you? What humanness?
Foundation. You know, the stability, knowing that, you know, and it's how I approach the instrument in general. I like, you know, even though I play some difficult and, you know, all over the place music, and I can play lots of notes, I both in the band and kind of in my life like to be the support system for the people
Yeah,
I'm around. And they know that they can take a chance on whatever they're doing, and I got their back. And when they land from that thing, whether it went well or poorly, I'm still here, and we're going to continue on our journey. And that's what I think good bass playing is. And then occasionally throwing in something that was, ooh, that was different, that was unpredictable, and which recontextualizes whatever they're doing. Right. If I do suddenly switch out from my stable role and do something that was a little unexpected, if I know that they'll trust me, that hey, this is cool, let's try something new, then even more good things happen. You know, I don't want to be boring, but I do like knowing that, you know, I got this locked down. I have drummers tell me all the time that I just have really, really good time, which is, you know, a very, very basic element of being a rhythm section member, whether it's bass or drums or even guitar. But it that alone just kind of makes it so that drummers in particular, they can take some crazy old fill where it sounds like they're playing a
yeah,
different song entirely, and we land on one together.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's because I trust myself and they trust me, and we're listening a little bit and shifting back and forth just a little bit, but we all have this internal clock that's locked together. And that's really, why I love the bass so much. It's you can't really. And one other thing I tell my students all the time, you notice the lack of bass way more than you notice incorrect bass, right?
Yeah.
At the show, if the bass suddenly drops out, everybody in the crowd is going, "What's happening?"
Yeah.
You hit one wrong note, nobody cares. Like, but if so, you hit the wrong note, keep going. I know I tell this to my students all the time: get back on the train. We all mess up. You got to fix it. You got to keep the thing going, because if those moments where that foundation is missing is way more kind of damaging to the experience, unless it's planned, than one wrong note here or there, or one not well executed passage or something like that.
Beautiful, Pete, because it relates to me. It reminds me of almost like a mama heartbeat. But it's easy for people to say, well, what does the bass extend? And you could go, well, your voice, or there's evident kind of things when I ask the extension question.
Mm-hmm.
Like film. What does film extend? People go, oh, well, your eye or your memory. But
Right.
McLuhan said it extends your foot because you travel. But
Yeah.
But foundation, I've never heard that. It's an amazing answer. Stability. And it reminded me, when you said foundation, it reminded me of Jamie Jamerson's, probably one of the most influential bass players of all time.
Absolutely.
Almost as better than Jocko, or whatever.
Yeah. If you talk about reach, yeah, I mean, more people have heard James Jamerson than Jocko.
Yeah, and then after James was Michael Henderson. In Motown, it was next Michael Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
And then my friend David Waller, who was living homeless in Venice for the last 5 years of his life, and he died in the parking lot at Rose. But, it was an amazing thing. These three bass players were the main dudes at Motown.
Mm-hmm.
And when Michael Henderson was playing with Stevie Wonder, Miles came up to him and says, dude, I want you to play bass in my band. He goes, dude, I'm an R&B player.
Yeah.
Miles said, yeah, that's what I want.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Then I get into Live Evil, and it becomes like lifeblood for me. And my band plays funk, and we eventually wanted to name our band Where Would We Be Without Michael Henderson?
Yeah.
And his lines are like this: boom, boom, boom. They're like so. It's not. There's so much space, right. And it is really what you got Jack DeJohnette and Airto playing this rhythm section to give Miles and McLaughlin. So it's really a great word to say foundation. But then you got Copeland saying the four elements or ingredients of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. So in non-academic, non-music teacher terms, how would you describe what is tone color?
I mean, yeah, non-academic terms. Yeah, good. It's bright versus dark. It's happy versus sad. There is an emotional sort of aspect to that. There's I try to think about like food a lot too. Like you can another thing I kind of learned how to do during the pandemic is cook. I had never really done it all that much before, and I've watched enough cooking shows that some of the stuff has seeped in on when to take the steak off and how to treat the vegetables and stuff like that. But you also kind of start noticing that with really good chefs, they taste something and they're not only tasting what's there, they're tasting what's not there. Right? They go, oh, this needs salt, this needs garlic, this needs acid, this needs spice, whatever. So there's, that's kind of the tone color thing of it is which direction are we leaning more in? Is it darker? Is it lighter? Is it faster? Is it slower? Is it, and that's not necessarily a tempo thing. It's literally like those other three things they're a little easier to define, right? We know what a melody is. It sits on top. We know what rhythm is. It's how we divide time as we're passing through it. But tone color, I kind of like that. There's a knob on that bass right there. That is the tone knob. So that's the easier sort of explanation. But that's not what you're asking. It's in the larger picture. What is the that there is a color aspect to it, and which blue is it? It's not just that. It's not just blue. It could be all the infinite shades of blue.
Yeah, Pete, thanks for being such a great listener too. You go, that's not what you're asking. Nobody in 40 years of me
Yeah.
interviewing people have says that's what you're not asking because they listened.
Yeah.
Because that's being a great musician you are. That's a key thing in being a musician. You have to be a listener.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But now how do you integrate those four melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color in your own composition? Is there a way you integrate them? Is there one you focus on, or is it just open up? Just talk about integrating the four.
Yeah. With my own stuff, especially with these newer tunes, I realized I am coming from the everything but the melody kind of world. I've always been so focused on that. Again, being a rhythm section member, how do I make sure that the notes I'm playing match up with what the melody and the harmony is, and also creates the harmony. The bass note ultimately creates the harmony. You could play two notes on a guitar and it'll sound like a major chord, and if I put a different note on the bass, those two notes suddenly in that context are a minor chord, right? So I've taken your song from happy to sad just by my choice of note. But there's also, but so I'll come back to things and try to think of what's the simplest melody I can put on this. I know I'm not really a specialist in that because I don't play melodies all that often, occasionally, but not like a guitar player or a singer or a sax player or things like that. So I try to make it so it's kind of an earworm of sorts. You want it to be something catchy, for sure. You don't want it to, I even though my music specifically, I write a lot in odd time signatures, and there's already some challenging things going on. So I try to then also tap into pop structures where it's kind of verse, chorus, verse. There's a melody you can sing. It comes back at the end and you remember it from before and things like that. Whether it's a long kind of drawn out melody or just a little 2 or 3 note thing. I like seeing it in the larger picture rather than check out this crazy melody that bounces all over the place.
Yeah. It reminds me of once I heard Thundercat, and he said, I was hugely influenced by Zappa, and one of his songs sounds like Teenage Win exactly.
Right.
And he's supposed to be this monster, kind of great bass player, and his stuff sounds like yacht rock. I mean, he admits it's yacht rock.
Right.
I shouldn't,
but that's
I don't mean to make a value judgment, but it's sort of like, dude. You want to make music accessible. You want people to hear it, but then you want to have the balls to do what Tool did and go, no, we're going to do what we want, and people find it.
Yeah.
So,
and Tool, just get back to that for a second. I saw them a few years ago. I saw them this summer too, but I'd never seen them before until about maybe 5 years ago. And I saw night one of their 2 sold out nights at the Staples Center of what is that, 30,000 people, 20,000 people, something like that, sold out for the weirdest, most unmarketable music. It was one of the most inspiring things to just kind of look in my seat and look behind me and look behind me and look around. And all these people were there for this weird ass unmarketable music. They had built it for so long, stuck to their guns, stuck to the 4 guys, in the band. And that's more inspiring than almost anything. It's just that even if I didn't like the music, I'd be in awe of that.
Amazing. In your age or mixed age?
What do you mean?
Attendees, are they more younger?
All over. Yeah.
All over.
Yeah. There's some in between all of our ages and younger. And, it's not one of those ones where I'm the only young person there or the only old guy there. It's definitely all over the place.
Yeah. So my friend says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. You've learned how to play the bass. You know the structure. How does one acquire taste?
Listening. Again, listening to other stuff. Some people argue with that one, where the argument for a lot of artists is the more other art that you take in, the more it's starting to seep into what you do, rather than you keeping your thing perfectly clean and pure, as if, but we all can't go be raised in a cave and never be exposed to other stuff. And it also comes back to the marketing thing. We do have to have some touch point of, hey, this sounds like this meets this, right? I've learned that from having to market my music, which I'm terrible at. But you have to be able to go, this is Weather Report meets Radiohead or something like that, which is kind of how I say my stuff. Or
that's great. I'm glad you said that. Report meets Weather. Very good.
Yeah.
And so along with this word taste, which was funny because you brought up the food, comparison in tone
Mhm.
color. McLuhan said two things. He said, song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference.
Okay.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I can see that for sure. There is a universality to it, and back when I was I'm still a music student. Ultimately, I'll never not be. But when I was in college for music, and it was just my job to kind of absorb all this stuff, I took a lot of ethnomusicology courses, and it was also right around the time when the concept of world music started coming up.
Yeah.
And I would go to that section of the CD store for however lame and sort of overly simplification of a term that is, but I'd literally just want to hear anything from a different cultural perspective, like what you're saying, and then kind of factor that into and go, oh, major isn't always happy, minor isn't always sad.
Yeah.
Things aren't always in 4/4. Things aren't always divided by 2. There's a lot of other aspects that come into that, but it still has a human impact.
Yeah.
And so I don't know so much about the language aspect of it, but the cultural thing where that's what they've been kind of brought up around and kind of what they've heard. So that affects their version of it. It's still the same 12 notes, which is kind of the biggest mystery of this whole thing until you get into microtonal and all that other stuff. But literally just the 12 notes. I've got it right here. Here's the circle of fifths. I use this to teach with all the time.
Wow. Yeah.
There's so much information on this little page and so much like Rosetta Stone kind of, oh, so this one connects to that, where I talk about music multiple hours of every day in a very analytical way, and I'm still finding new Indiana Jones like little secrets on this map
Yeah.
that I never thought of before. And it's really kind of amazing. And a lot of that has to do with my wife will take me to a concert at the Bowl of some band I've never heard, and I will deliberately not listen to anything before we get there. And last time it was an Argentinian ska band called Los Fabulosos Cadillacs, and they were incredible, like incredible. And I didn't grow up on that. I'd never listened to it before. I was the only one in the crowd who didn't know every word. It was really amazing, and it was such a different source of where that all came from, but it spoke to me, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't grow up in Argentina, and I don't speak Spanish that fluently. I'm decent, but I didn't know what the songs were about all that much. I could get little bits here and there, but it still rocked my world.
Unbelievable. Really
so,
great, Pete, because T.S. Eliot said poetry can communicate before it's understood.
right.
So that's what you were getting in when Frank had the tuba throat singers jam with him in his basement.
Right.
Richard Feynman brought the tuba throat singers to Pasadena, and they were in the Rose Bowl parade, and then they were on Johnny Carson. Then they're jamming in Frank's basement,
Right.
and we went and saw them in a park in Pasadena, and we found out they sing about 3 things: their boots, snow, and their horses. But
Yes.
if you hear their music, for me it was transcendental. I mean,
Right.
it took me
Yeah.
to another, and just same thing with Brazilian music taking over America.
Mhm.
And we didn't know what all the words meant, and we didn't have to know.
Exactly.
But why don't we do a couple more, and then we'll fulfill our 90 minutes, and you can go get ready for your gig. But I would love to plan a part 2 where we can really get a lot deeper into music, performance, and especially Frank Zappa. So
Sure.
somewhere down the line, 6 months down, we'll plan one. But here's a couple more. Tell me, what's more fundamental, music or language?
I think music, honestly, because one of the things, especially for beginner students, I'll teach the blues, right? Because
Yeah.
it's the first time that I'm saying this. Don't just learn this song, learn this structure, and then do what you want to do within that structure. That's kind of all jazz ultimately, but it starts from the blues. And I've certainly been in this situation, and I tell my students this too. You can be on a stage with people that you speak 0 of the same language, like not a word. And you can go blues and F, and they'll go, sure. And then you're in, and it really, there's a universality to music that that is more so than, and once again, maybe they don't know what F is, but you go this note, and then we go up to this note, and then we come back, and then we go up to that one, and then back. And they go, cool, I've heard that, I've done that, let's go. Right. And I've played with people that after we're done, I try to talk to them and it doesn't work, but we just sounded great together, and it's so that's always really exciting in that it really does kind of go beyond cultures and musics and boundaries and borders and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's if you ever seen Genghis Blues, the documentary about the black blues singer from San Francisco who just kind of taught himself how to sing tuba throat singing.
Right.
And then it is like he didn't go and learn from them with their language. He just learned it as that universal language.
Yeah.
And what you said about the blues is so important because that's really what my sister brought home Led Zeppelin 2 from college. And I goes, what the fuck? And then my friend 2 blocks away went, that's the blues.
Yep.
And then, really? And then I went backwards, and I got into the blues. And I eventually learned, someone said, I think it's Ray Charles said, what is the blues? He says, the blues is a black man walking down the street and he has one shoe in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
The white guy comes up and says, did you lose a shoe? And the black man said, no, I found one.
Yeah.
And that is like, to me, so touching because, Frank was a lover of Buzu Chavez, this Zydeco, New Orleans guy. He had one hit. It's called Keep a Little Paper in My Shoe. It's an actual line that Frank stole from Buzu and he stuck it in one of his songs.
Mm-hmm.
I think
can't afford no shoes. It's like that,
well, that's what you see. You have ESP. That's what I was going to lead to. So I went up to Frank and my friend interviewed Buzu Chavez. And he says, what does that mean? Keep a little paper in my shoe. I think it's in Brown Moses. It's on Think Fish. Mm-hmm. Frank slips that line in. Mm-hmm. And I says, my friend interviewed Buzu and he asked him, what's that mean? And I says, what does it mean to you, Frank? And Frank says, well, keep a little paper in your shoe. It sounds like, you keep an extra $1 or a $5 bill in your shoe. And Buzu said, no, it's to keep the hole in your shoe blocked.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how beautiful Frank was. He was like willing to know, I'm going to get wider knowledge here and hear the source.
Right. Because you're peeking into someone else's experience with that, with those kind of things. So
yeah. But then Frank took it to another level and he wrote Can't Afford No Shoes. And it's all sort of full circle. Mm-hmm. And so tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Oh boy. Jeez. That's a good one. The instrumental versions of Take Your Clothes Off When You Dance, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I'm forgetting the name of it. It's just so happy and jaunty and almost kind of cheesy. I love musical jokes like that. I watched a lot of the Muppets growing up to the point where one of my new tunes that we're playing tonight has a sample of Harry Belafonte with the Muppets, because that was my first experience with odd time signatures. There was a song in 5 that he did with the Muppets called We Come From the Fire. The song's called The Earth Song, but it's my song's called We Come From the Fire. But it was, just that sort of, engagement with earlier stuff like that. But at the end of the Muppets theme, at the very beginning, or actually at the end of the show, it goes da 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 da, and Zoot hits the wrong note as the very last note of the song. I do that all the time in rehearsal, to the point where Tweezley once was even like, "Hey, you're not going to do that at the show, are you?" Because I just think it's hilarious. Like we just executed G-Spot Tornado or Peaches, like something ridiculously hard, where I played every single note right. The big last note, like really awfully wrong, couldn't be wronger note. That still cracks me up every single time.
Yeah, that's like the great thing you learn. Like Frank and James Brown were the only guys who would fine you if you hit a wrong note, supposedly. Right. But I like in the doc on James Brown, they reveal that when he went like this with his hand, he was pointing at the musician, meaning you're getting fined $5.
Yep. Yeah, you turn around, you see him doing that to you. You know, you're in trouble. Yeah. That's crazy.
But that's like, well, we'll talk about this next time, but it's like Thelonious Monk saying there are no wrong notes.
Yeah, there's that too, you know, but it's more, it'll be funny.
Yeah,
you know,
it'll be funny.
hilarious.
So when I ask Keneally all these questions, I says, Thelonious Monk says there are no wrong notes. What do you agree or disagree? And Keneally went, yeah, for Thelonious Monk, there were no wrong notes.
Right. Yeah, it's all about placement.
And then Hannah Brooks, the great boogie woogie pianist. If you haven't heard her story's amazing, but they just put it on YouTube. Teenage Boogie. Google it and listen to this woman play boogie woogie. Anyways, we said there's Thelonious Monk, there are no wrong notes. What do you think? She goes, no, there's wrong notes. It's just how good you cover them up.
Exactly. Play it again and make it seem like you meant it. That's attributed to Miles. I think I've heard it from.
Well, the Miles thing is great because Herbie hits the wrong note in that gig, and Miles looks at him, and that's where Herbie had his big revelation. Right. No, just keep going, cover it up, work it in, play it again, blah blah blah.
No.
All right, Pete. We'll have a great gig tonight. Thanks really so appreciate your words, and music are an inspiration to me. And I hope we can plan a part 2 down the line. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we keep talking forever and ever.
Cool, man. Yeah, let's talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, take it easy.